Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Fund Your Passion podcast with me, Amanda Stretton, and my beautiful co-host. What am I going to call you?
I don't know.
Darren. Darren.
I don't know. It's twice in a day you call me beautiful. People are going to talk.
Well, I'm just trying to big you up. Slim.
Thank you.
Darren.
Slim.
Yeah.
I got told I was lost weight this morning, but I've only been on a diet for 2 days, so I don't know how that's even possible.
It's been working superbly. Well done, you.
I think it's the stripes.
Definitely,
so.
They're very slimming. And of course, today we're now at DK Engineering and James Cottingham. Thank you very much for having us.
Pleasure. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Now, just tell me a little bit about DK. Started off as a family business, but really it has grown tremendously. What is it that you do in a nutshell?
So in a nutshell, obviously, as you alluded to, originally Mum and Dad set the business up as a hobby business. So they had cars of their own. They were buying and selling racing cars in the main. Mum had a full-time job. Dad had a full-time job working at Kodak as a research physicist. But Kodak had in their car park at the main facility where he worked in Harrow, a big sort of car centre for the staff. So they really encouraged people after work to stay at work doing stuff. So playing squash, dancing, or working on cars, and no one else used it apart from him. So he would buy cars on a Thursday night, I think it was. He would go to Euston Station, get the exchange and mark before anyone else, phone whoever was, whichever cars, usually Jaguar XK120s or C-types or D-types, that were just being advertised that week, and go straight to that person's house and buy the car there and then before anyone else had. And perhaps, over a 2 or 3 week period, use the Kodak facilities to semi-restore the cars and do things like that. And then...
How long ago was that?
That was early 70s. Or late 60s to early 70s. So he owned some wonderful cars at that time. So in the early 60s, he owned a magnesium-bodied XK120, which was an ex-works car that was raced a lot by Bob Berry. Very, very special sort of D-type running gear, but an XK120 with this lightweight body, which was built as a prototype for the C-types, or a spare car for the C-types when they went to Le Mans for the first year, but actually never ran at Le Mans. So he had that originally. And then in 69, he had 49 FXM, which is one of the 2 low-drag lightweight E-types. He would use that pretty much as a daily car, and at Kodak park it in the car park in the managing director's slot, and it always pissed off the management staff. He had these cars, but it got to a point in 77 basically whereby he had actually taken on some premises for his free time hobby and decided to just pack up and start a business. Being sort of at the time Jaguar specialists, they realised there was a bit of a gap in the market for Ferraris. So at that time, there was really only one Ferrari specialist in the UK, which was David Clark Engineering, which later became Grapple. Of course, Bob Houghton at the time was working, for David Clark, and so Dad saw a bit of an opportunity to specialise in Ferrari because no one was really doing it, and I think some of his biggest hobby profits have been out of Ferraris to date. So he started doing that. Mum was running the office. He was kind of hands-on, but got some guys together, and even the person that he was renting the premises from started working for him. And they had a small team, and some of those guys were, one of his first employees was Mark Lyon, who later in the mid-90s went to go and set up G2 Engineering, who very sadly passed away last year. But he was an apprentice as a 16-year-old for Dad in 77. And Will Birrell, who runs Motivation, that's not far from us here, and a few other guys that are really well known today. Jonathan Wheatley, who's the sporting director for Red Bull F1 in the late 70s, was an apprentice sweeping the floor for us, as his father was and is a great friend of my parents. So it all started from there. And 50 Sports Ferraris was where it really started. So he would go to the States with Mum, and they would go and buy these 50 Sports Ferraris that were in barns, broken, old race cars that no one wanted, quite often without their original engine. He'd quite often find the original engines and reunite them with the cars and carry out these meticulous restorations that then, by the time they were finished, between 77 and sort of 1990, the cars grew in value so much that by the time the restorations were finished, they were worth 10x or 20x of what they were worth when he bought them. So it was a really good business model. And we had some great clients like Ralph Lauren. He restored over 10 cars for Ralph Lauren in the late 80s, early 90s, and did lots of stuff like that. And then obviously early 90s we had the recession. So by that time as a family, we had grown a huge collection comparatively to what we have today. They all had to go, but the business stayed and the house stayed. I think it was the same story for a lot of people. But we managed to sort of stay on our feet and carried on as a restoration business through the 90s. But when Jeremy left university, my middle brother, in the mid-90s. He sort of went into the family business, as did my eldest brother, Justin. And Jeremy, after a few years, started sort of growing the sales side of the business. And that's really where our F40 specialism started, because Jeremy would go to Europe, buy a car, drive it back, register it in the UK, sell it. Without the internet at that time, it was a bit different. It was a bit scary going to Europe to go and buy a car. And he would go there, wait for 2 days for the money to clear, drive the car back to the UK. And so that's where a lot of our early F40s came from. And so the sales department grew, to be a decent size. And obviously over the years, we'd sold some really big cars and been involved in certainly some GTO sales and DBR1 sales and stuff like that. But to actually have a standalone sales facility that wasn't just selling the cars that we owned and had recently restored, or the occasion where a customer would say, "You've restored this car, can you sell it for me?" We actually had a standalone sales department. I joined the business in 2002 out of school, and spent my whole gap year there, then went to university and did engineering for 4 years. But it was only 25, 26 weeks of the year in Bristol, which is where I was. And I was always really bored for the rest of the time. So I was always back in the business for those 4 years. And then in 2007, we moved to Little Green Street Farm, which is our home today, which isn't where we are right now, but that's the home, which is our Victorian farm that we restored at the time. And that was my project straight out of university to oversee that. And we moved the business there. And then, of course, we had the credit crunch. So it was like we'd spent all that money and suddenly it felt like it was all going to go wrong again. But we just sort of battled away and grew the business even further to where it is today. So now we're 50 staff strong. We've got over 500 cars in our care. At any one time, we'll have 50 or so cars for sale. We get involved in selling some of the most significant cars in the world. So last year we sold pretty much what I think is the best Jaguar D-Type in the world, which was a long nose car that ran at Le Mans 4 times. Countless short wheelbases, California Spiders, all the big ticket Ferraris. Unfortunately, no 250 GTOs of late because they seem to have eluded us. But also, in the more modern stuff in recent years, we were very much behind the growth, I think, in value of Porsche GT1s, CLK GTRs, getting involved in the sale of those, lots of McLaren F1s. So to answer your first question is, today I would say we're the only company in the world that does everything to the level that we do under one roof. So that's restoration, it's servicing, it's sales, and it's storage, like in this building.
And race prep. I mean, you do.
And race prep.
Yeah.
Actually, less so these days than we used to, but if it's a Ferrari, we'll race prep it.
Yeah.
But it's the management as well. So I'd like to think that a client comes to us and they just want us to look after their collection and give them the best advice. So if we don't necessarily, and race prep is an interesting one, if we don't think we're the people people placed, we'll make sure the car goes to the right people and that the right processes are gone through and the bills are sensible and all that sort of stuff, which I don't think anyone else in the industry can offer, because we have expertise in restoration that we have done ourselves, not just subcontracted to everyone over the years. We've handled the best cars in the world. We've participated in Concours events forever with our own cars. We've raced with our own cars forever. So last year, Dad was 80 and he raced on his 80th birthday and he's been racing since he was 21. So, we know what we're doing when it comes to race cars.
I've got a question. It's just the most phenomenal story, and I've known you a long time and I don't know 80% of that. It's phenomenal. But where do you go from here? I mean...
going from here is something I'm asked a lot at the moment. Yeah. And obviously, as you know, my brother and I and one other, Andrew Hall, we are the founders of a business called Kahuna, which is an online platform. So I think for the next 5 years, that's what we're going to be focusing on, which is a platform to help dealers actually sell in the auction environment, but under their own banner and branding online, because we've seen that that's become really popular. But there's been so much risk involved in it to date, whereby you're buying from a username, as opposed to sort of saying, can I pick the phone up, talk to this guy? Can I offer a part exchange? It's impossible at the moment. Whereas we've created this platform where all the dealers can go online, list their cars in the auction arena, and then the buyer knows who they're buying from.
Now, I'm going to come to Kahuna in a bit.
Yeah.
Before we move on to where he's going next.
Yes.
So I want to know more about this.
Yeah.
But for DK, one of my limiting factors is our location. We're so close to London that we've got lots of space, but we can't build. So hence this storage facility that's one of our latest. We're very lucky that it's next door to our existing storage facility. It's not on site, but it's very close by to our headquarters, which is good from a security point of view. It also separates the businesses. So, I'd love to try and work out how I can further grow our footprint in terms of showroom space and storage space, that sort of stuff. And I think within the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see some sort of operation overseas for DK. I'm approached regularly about going into partnership
yeah.
with someone.
I'm
So-
intrigued to know what your parents think from those very early beginnings of
Because they've seen the market change.
many times.
Yeah,
but
more
just
times than.
Well, I mean,
starting off
when it came to Brexit, they said, well, we remember when it was the other way and we were going into Europe, so they've seen.
Yeah, but I mean, to
every
go
direction.
from buying cars and restoring them in Kodak's car park to this phenomenal empire. I mean, did they ever envisage that it would come to something like this, or did they just thought we're going to buy cars, restore them, sell them?
I think so. From 77 to 89, they always say it was an amazing time. Just the business grew so quickly, and year on year, in terms of assets in the business, they doubled their assets every year, and they thought this can't go on forever, and it was an incredible time for them. And they probably just timed it a little bit wrong, that they had a few too many cars. So come 1989, they had an XKSS, they had a right-hand drive 4-cam, they had an 860 Monza, they had two 500 Testarossas, they had a lot of cars.
I can only imagine that they could have held on to all
Yeah.
of those now.
Yeah, and actually a lot of times we have, and we always say that we sold the XKSS to buy their farm, and until very recently that seemed like the better deal.
Yeah.
And then about 4 or 5 years ago, it's like, oh, maybe we should have had the XKSS because it's worth a lot more now. But we've done so much with that farm because we've stored parts and spares, and now we have 45 cars there in various showrooms. But I think the last 15 years for them has been, or certainly the last 10 years, when we moved to Green Street in 2007, that was a big move, and they were really proud of that. And for them, I think it was like they thought that was their last hurrah, if you like. And after 5 years, they probably gradually stepped back. But there were a number of obstacles that meant that they couldn't do that. And then I think they also realised they didn't want to.
Yeah.
And COVID was definitely that. So they went from telling me that they wanted to be at home more to having to stay at home, to telling me that after 3 months, we really want to come back to work.
But I guess also having all of you involved in the business as well. I mean, that's quite unique, that actually everybody's a part of it and there's been no fallings out, or maybe there have, you don't need to tell us about that. But do you know what I mean? That everybody is still kind of close in the business.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. And 15 years ago, our bank at the time, Hoare & Co, said, you guys have got to come to a family business forum. And we didn't really understand why. And then you sat around this table listening to everyone else's stories, and we were like, yeah, actually, this is very similar to our situation. I think family businesses are fantastic, especially with ours, because we all love cars and we've grown up around the cars. So, my earliest memories are sitting in 512M race cars in mum and dad's garages at home when I'd come home from boarding school and thinking I'm doing a lap of Spa.
Yeah.
Like that's real, that happened. And, there were 917s and Ford GT40s just in original condition
Everywhere.
before they were super valuable in the 90s, just sitting in our barns at home. You just remember all of that stuff. So that's amazing. But, it's not been without speed bumps.
No, of course.
And,
well, no family
and
ever
today, Jeremy, my middle brother, he left in 2014. And we work together very closely now. Obviously, we've just set up a business together. But he's got his own thing. And it does, I think it's really hard for people to realise that perhaps that isn't your destination. It's like, I'll try the family business, but if it doesn't work, it is okay to go and do something else.
Yeah.
And I've seen other family businesses in the industry have the same thing.
Yeah.
Did he do?
There's a lot of pressure on you guys.
You can go and do your own thing. And also the problem is that often you fall into the family business because it's an easy option.
Yeah.
For me, that it wasn't the easy option. It was, I went and did engineering. I thought I'd like to go and do something like work in Formula One or work for ProDrive or something like that. But I actually realised, having done a few internships, it wasn't for me, and the buzz of a deal was actually where I really wanted to be, and growing a business of our own was really where I wanted to be. And fortunately, I'm quite multi-talented in terms of I can do help with a restoration in terms of oversee it. I can sell the best cars in the world, do quite well on the racetrack. There are all
I was
these
about to
different
ask
things.
you if that's why you chose engineering, so that you could come into the family business, or if you had horizons
Yeah.
elsewhere. But it's interesting that you came back.
Yeah, and I'm lucky that we had the farm development opportunity in 2007. So that gave me a year of just looking after builders, which I'm sure we've
You're
all done
excellent at
before,
making
which
tea.
is
probably
very
more-
interesting. When they say,
more challenging than cars.
and when they say they're going to the pub on a Thursday night, you think, we realise after 3 months that means they're not coming in until Monday.
Yeah.
It was an interesting time, and I gained so much experience actually dealing, because I was in a public school boy at the end of the day who did engineering, who's led a charmed life, but actually dealing with guys and working out how to manage people, that was an education in itself. And then, we grew the business to where it is, and it's just turned out to be, it works. But Yeah.
So obviously you've done an engineering degree. You also race, as you alluded to as well. Just tell us a bit about your racing and also what that lends to your general understanding of any of the cars that you are either storing, restoring, or even advising people to buy.
I think it's really important. I think if you were someone that had sold your business for 200 million and you decide you're going to spend 50 million on cars, I think it's really important that you work with someone that has experience in all fields. And I've noticed some of the other premier dealers in the world of late suddenly becoming restoration experts by taking photographs and visiting a restoration shop every now and again and making a big deal of it. And I mean that sarcastically because I feel very sarcastic about it. You know, I've grown up around going with Dad to look at, you know, chassis and bodies being restored and details correct and how you prevent the problem at the end of the restoration 10 months before by one little
Decision that
procedure.
you make,
know,
yeah.
one decision exactly. Whereas I think a lot of dealers are making a big deal of managing restorations, but they really are just taking photographs and going to check, you know, the bill's okay. So I think that's really important. And the racing as well. If someone comes to us and says, you know, I want to go racing and I'd like to be at Goodwood and I'd like to do this, you know, we'll make sure that they buy the right car that suits them. With my modern racing of late, you know, I didn't do anything in my 20s. I'm now in my very late 30s, nearly 40. And, you know, I've just had to tick that box. I want to get to Le Mans. And I've got a lot of clients that want to get to Le Mans and do those sorts of things. And at the moment, I don't think we can offer that advice, but it was something we were being asked. Whereas now already, I can have conversations sort of 2 years into that program of saying, I've done it, you know, this is how we've raised sponsorship. This is the path to go. This is the expectations of it. This is how you do it. And I think it's really important. And the same with, you know, going to Concours events. You know, it's not necessarily for me a Concours event, but I've been there, I've seen it. We've won Concours events with restorations we've done. And, you know, I think it's really important that you've done that. And the same with storage. I think you have to know how to store cars. And it still amazes me that I go to a lot of houses where someone has an amazing car and has a terrible garage, you know, and
There are some terrible garages
still
I've seen.
Still to this day.
Awful.
Yeah.
There are some amazing garages.
There are, and it's getting better, you know, and actually a lot of my customers now come to me and say, right, those lights or the dehumidifiers or how do you do this? How do you do the floor? Where do you get your lift? What do you recommend? You know, it's part of that complete service of, well, we've built a lot of buildings for cars and they're all good, but some of them are better than others. So we can offer that advice. And, you know, it comes back to what's DK all about.
Is that chargeable advice or it's just the
no,
long-term
it comes with it,
customers
but,
who
you know,
buy cars?
This is a premium business. So a lot of people will sometimes be of the opinion that perhaps we're too expensive. But I think everything that we provide is to the highest standard. So you get what you pay for. And with that comes a lot of free advice. And, you know, it's a journey. And you know, the entry into these cars and the exit out of them, it always, I think it's fair to everyone involved. So no, we don't charge for that, but I'm really happy to get involved and help people.
So obviously you're well known on the classic race scene, and you're doing some modern racing as well. You want to race Le Mans. What is it you want to race at Le Mans?
Well, it'd be great to be in a Ferrari.
Yeah,
It'd be great, but doing British GT, there just aren't any teams that are prepared to run a Ferrari in the UK at the moment, and it's a lot more expensive. But it's been really interesting from a marketing point of view because suddenly so many more people talk to me. You know, so I go to Goodwood, where people have probably got bored of having the same conversations with me about the same cars. Suddenly the people that I know relatively well come up to me to talk to me about British GT, modern racing, even they'd like to do it. Conversations come from there. And of course, that whole paddock is completely untapped.
How do you find the time?
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of people ask me that. I don't know, quite tired.
Yeah.
But it's always, I've always been very dedicated to the cars. And I love cars.
Yeah.
You know, I love the thrill of a deal, but I love speed, I love driving, and I love cars. And, you know, I think if someone says to me, you've won 100 million tomorrow, you know, I've spent 99 of it within 24 hours on cars.
Well, that's another question I'm going to come to in a little bit. But, you know, as you mentioned earlier on, you know, you've been behind some of the biggest sales, certainly in recent years. What have been the sort of memorable ones for you?
Memorable ones. I always reference this short wheelbase here actually as a really good one. That was a really good client of mine. That was one of my first clients that I'd sort of built up from the first steps of buying big old cars to managing restorations for him. And he brought his father onto the scene, who is, you know, a very, very successful gentleman who is now, you know, senior in years in terms of, I think he's in his 80s now, but really fit, exciting guy who's just got this story to tell about his life, and a real perfectionist. So we got on really well, and he was like, I want a short wheelbase. So this car was I went to go and see it in Italy, and it was one of those situations where I knew the price before I went, so I went to see it, and then they sat me down for lunch and said, do you like the car? And I said, yeah, of course. No, I really like it. And I said, oh, great, so it's a deal then. And I'm thinking, can we negotiate, or can I think about it? And it was like, no, you came, you knew the price, surely we're doing the deal. And eventually, after a long story short, because we don't have time for it, but eventually the customer that I had in mind for it, when I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do here, and I agreed to buy it, and I didn't quite have all the money to pay for it, he called me one morning at 7 a.m. and said, you know that short wheelbase you've been talking about? Let's do the deal. So I was like,
I'm off the hook.
saved. And then when we restored the car, as we started researching it, we found out that it had some really rare features. So it's got a different colour roof, the interior is two-tone, it's got a different steering wheel, different dash, different armrests that had been changed the last time it was restored in the 80s. So we were able to research it, and it was really exciting to sort of present to the world this car that no one had really ever seen before, as it was when it was new. So, that's a standout one for me, especially because it's start to finish. There's also another car that we'll see later, which is a 14 Livre Tour de France, which Mum and Dad owned in the early 90s and sold in the late 90s, famously to pay for school fees. And we went to an auction in America in about 2007 or 8, and it was being sold by the guy we'd sold it to, and we'd sold it for something like $600,000, and it sold for $6 million. I'll never forget that Dad turned around to me and said, you realise your education cost over $5 million?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, yeah, but it was worth it, hopefully. And then later on we bought that car and re-restored it for that client, and now it lives with us. So, there are lots of stories like that, and adventures, and going to places all over the world, managing to buy a certain black McLaren F1 from a really famous collection that everyone talks about but no one has access to, and we got into there and got it out. And when it came to the UK, everyone was just like, how on earth did you do that? And we tried to keep it really quiet, but as soon as that rumour was out there, it was just spread like wildfire. And the same with the Rob Walker short wheelbase, which actually Jeremy sold when he was still at DK in about 2013, but such a significant car, and had belonged at the time to a friend of the family as well, a long-term client who just came to us and said, look, I've got a family, position whereby I need to deal with this business, buy this property, do this, so I've got to sell the short wheelbase. And we sold it in secret, and it today it's well known that it's with Ross Brawn, but at the time it was top secret. But when the secret came out, it was just like wildfire. And we were all at Retronville at the time, and everyone was coming up to us saying, have you sold that car? Have you sold that car? And that's kind of more exciting because it was such a secret for such a long time.
Because it's interesting as well that, you've got your Ferrari sort of specialist position.
That's where it started,
if you like. But actually, I mean, when we just look around here, McLaren, Maserati, Porsche, you're everywhere.
It goes hand in hand, and I always find that primarily our clients are Ferrari guys, but they will have other brands within the collection. So it'll be 80% Ferrari and 20% other stuff. And as a result of price points and trends, you tend to end up getting involved in other models and makes and understanding them and learning about them. And again, it's part of the journey. So it's helping someone put together this amazing collection, and it doesn't have to be just Ferrari. I think every GT owner should have an F1 as well, and an 8C, and all the great stuff. Yeah, there's a few other bits.
But the specialism Ferrari started with your parents and your dad.
Yeah, but we were
junkyard
specialists originally.
Is that where your heart lies as well?
I mean, I'm lucky that I've really, the greatest Ferraris in the world. I've been there, I've seen them, I've touched them, I've driven them all my life, and it's amazing how I see these cars come back around that I remember from when I was 7 years old. And one of my customers, who's really great long-term client, came to us originally because he had been researching all these mega cars and being offered lots of really good stuff by all the brokers because everyone knew that he was a new man on the scene. And he said every time I went to look it up there's a website called Barchetta, every time I looked it up, there was always DK Engineering or David Cossing in there. So it just seemed like I needed to deal with you guys because you knew the cars, and that's kind of the way it's gone. It's just because we've been involved in so many of them over the years. You stick to the Ferrari thing. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned it earlier on, but obviously the market is changing, and you're behind the new Kahuna platform. What was the sort of motivating, what made you do it in the first place?
Well, during COVID, I'm lucky that my sales team, I always call it a second generation business now, and my sales team's quite young. So I'm the oldest at 39.
Poor.
And
How does that look at us? We're like the oldies.
I'm granddad and grandma, no?
lots of experience though. The guys were willing to put the hours in during COVID, and actually lockdown was fantastic because we're really close to London here, but our roads were deserted, so we could do amazing photography. We worked late all the time. It was kind of, we were in our bubble, and we even built a bar at the office so that everyone could actually have a couple of beers after work and relax. And at that time, we saw that some of the other platforms were getting really popular, and especially in the last 2 years, I've noticed that other dealers have been putting cars on there, but it didn't feel like it was sitting right, that they were putting cars on there, but it was anonymous, but it wasn't anonymous, and they'd send a bulk email out, but then, if someone stumbled across the listing, it was just a username. And I thought, well, I'd like to auction some cars because I can see it's a really good way for a client to price discover, as we call it, or the price discovery process is really good. You're in a room virtually with all the guys, and you're interested in the car, and everyone pays as much as they want to.
A willing buyer and a willing seller, and you find
and that's
that
it.
natural
And you find that
point.
balance. And for years, one of our showrooms, which is our Prestige showroom, you'll get a car on consignment. You try and be very aggressive with the pricing, and it just sits there for 3 months because everyone that phones up or comes in to see it says, "Oh, it's really well priced. What's wrong with it?" Or "Is it cheap enough?" Whereas the auction arena gives you that opportunity, but our website doesn't have enough traffic or through flow for us to make the most of it. So I suddenly thought, well, the best way for us to deal with this is for all of us dealers to get together, have a new platform that also bolts on classifieds, because I couldn't understand why you have to be one or the other. Do both.
Yeah.
I do sales and storage. I don't do just sales and just storage.
Yeah.
So why can't you have classifieds alongside auctions? And give everyone the opportunity to, create a listing under their own banner. And we spent so much money on the technology so that the dealers have control of their accounts. So they create their listings, they dictate when the auction starts, they dictate what their reserve is, and it's in their hands. So it's no longer, I've bought this car and I'm not happy with it, I'm going to talk to the platform. It's, I've bought it from this dealer, and if there is an issue, you talk to the dealer, and the dealer will give you great service, because we've all got reputations to protect, we've all got standards that we adhere to, that we've developed, that we make sure that we, the hurdles we jump over when we're preparing cars to sell. And so that's the whole point of it. So on the flip side, not only have the dealers got the opportunity to now take advantage of the auction environment, but the private buyers that are buying online know who they're buying from. And that gives so many more benefits, like being able to say, hey, I'm really interested in this car, but it's 100,000, I don't have 100,000. Would you consider my part exchange? Or even better, can you prepare a finance quote for me in advance? Here are my terms. This is the deposit I want to pay. This is the structure I want. Online, who are you going to do that with? If it's a private seller, you don't accept an invoice from a private seller. It needs to be via a dealer. So
We do actually.
Well, okay. In general though.
In general, there's a lot more risk attached to private sellers. I mean, there's title issues, there's MQ issues. So we have to do ourselves a lot more validation. It's a lot harder
when it's private.
Yeah, I prefer every day of the week from a quality.
And these
quality
cars
dealer.
are such high value. Why take the risk? As
So
a buyer,
do you
as
see
a seller.
things like Kahuna working at certain price points within the market, or do you see it being
ultimately, I think
top to bottom?
I think it will be top to bottom. Our target market right now is we're starting with the atmosphere that we know and understand, and the dealers that are that we've worked
Well, actually,
with.
this is the not the issue. It's a challenge really with other auction platforms online. It's private individuals listing their cars through an auction process, and actually. The majority of the finance market don't offer private vendor sale, and that's an issue when you're trying to get funding to buy those cars. And also, as a finance company, again, validating title, provenance, and mixable quality, it's very hard.
Yeah.
So in Kahuna, it's much more from my perspective, it'd be much more palatable. You know
and
exactly
transparent.
And transparent.
Transparent is like this whole sort of private messaging thing that you have to do traditionally. And I think the other platforms do a great job, by the way. I think if you're a private seller,
they're different markets.
who doesn't want to deal with a dealer,
totally different markets.
Fantastic. They're really good. They do the work for you. They do the write-ups. They list it for you. They suggest what reserve you should have. But as a dealer, I can do all of that myself. I don't need a helping hand. I just need the platform to do it on, whereby there are going to be lots of people looking at all the different things. And then when they click on the particular lot they're interested in, bang, it pops up.
Yeah.
And it's under the banner of who you're buying from. And you can pick the phone up. You can go and look at the car with ease. It makes it a lot easier. And I think there's probably been a bit of a thinking that you've got to keep the seller secret and the buyer secret until the end because they might try and swerve. But the whole point of the auction is that you'll get the most money or in that environment, you'll get the most money you can because all of the buyers are in one room at the same time. At the
If
end.
you're buying a very expensive car, would you want to go and buy from a private individual if you're not in the trade and you can?
Unless you knew
I mean,
the car
obviously you do because
particularly,
you buy from.
But it comes. But that's always the nightmare.
Yeah, that's the nightmare.
You buy
right?
a car, and it arrives, and you say, "Where's the service book?"
Yeah.
And they go, "Oh, I never got it from when I bought it.
Well, yeah.
Sorry." If I did that, then it's like we've got to sort it out. Where's the spare key? That's the one that happens all the time.
Always.
Where's the spare key? We've got to provide a spare key.
Try repossessing the cars. You come with no keys.
Okay. Hopefully not.
You've also very recently been appointed the executive agents for the McMurtry Spearling. Now that's a game-changing car in the market. Where do you see those sorts of cars being positioned? Because I mean, that to me is niche times 10.
Yeah, I've seen it in the Middle East. They have these evening track days where they just go and get their hypercar and go flat out and have a great time. So I've always thought that race cars are going to go in that direction. The McMurtry, it's not so much about being green. It's about utilising technology and electricity and just doing something that's utterly bonkers. And to this point in time, no one outside of McMurtry really understands how that thing works because they've got a really advanced skirt system that they haven't let anyone see. And it doesn't wear out quickly and it creates 2 tons of downforce at standstill. 24,000 RPM on the downforce fan. I mean, we went to Mirror a few weeks ago to go and do some client demonstrations, and the thing's bonkers to the point where I was actually a bit apprehensive about having a go, and I didn't have a go in the end. I was a bit like, I might embarrass myself. I might not be able to handle this.
That's what I said to you, isn't it?
Yeah, you
did.
did.
Actually, I mean,
if you can't handle it,
exactly.
No chance
I mean, it
for
kind
me.
of scares me a little bit.
Yeah, it's bonkers.
Yeah.
Like the thing is bonkers, but Thomas Yates, the designer and MD, he believes that this is a Concours moment in the automotive world, and what they've
it's certainly the
developed
point I think at which it's going to.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to listen to him about who's approached him and who's talking to him about the technology. And I don't think we can see where it's going, but I think in 10 years' time we will be like, that's where it started. I think the electric car thing per se is a bit of a joke, and I said that quite vocally 5 years ago, and a lot of people
I was
said,
going to just about ask you that.
Yeah, a lot of people said to me at the time, that's brave. But I really didn't believe that it was sustainable, in terms of the life of these cars. And I was talking to someone yesterday about their son's first car, and it's a 7 or 8 year old Polo, and it looks brand new. In 2002, I had a 94 Polo, and all my friends at school were like, that is an old banger. And it was like 300 quid's worth, and it was awful. And it wasn't that old. But today, you look at a 20-year-old car, and they look almost new. Look at a 51 plate Polo. It doesn't look dated.
No.
It doesn't look old.
I had a Fiat 127.
Yeah.
That was my first, and that really was a banger.
Yeah. But that was what it was all about. I think I was just, because my brothers were older, it was like they really had bangers, and so I had to have a banger. But today, you just don't see that.
No.
Everyone had Beetles and stuff like that. You don't see people in older cars.
No.
But they weren't actually that old at the time.
I had a white XR2. I think I was living it up.
Yeah, you were.
I was 17 years old and a white XR2.
How do you insure it?
I think I was named driver on
Mum's policy.
company policy or something.
It's always the way, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't believe in the electric car thing. I think that so many people buy these cars because of the tax benefit, and not really because they believe that they're green, and the mining and the raw materials, and what do you do with the battery when it's defunct pretty soon. Whereas all these cars, my point to the Polos was that these cars will last for 20 years with ease.
Keep going.
That's sustainability, and we've been saving cars from the grave for 45 years plus, and have saved some wonderful cars. And in terms of carbon footprint, these are doing brilliantly, aren't they? And I think it'll be really interesting in 5 years' time when we look back where we'll be with. I could be wrong, but I think we'll look back and say, what were we all thinking with the electric cars? If it wasn't for the tax benefit, no one would have done it.
What about e-fuels? A lot of talk about
got to be the future.
Yeah.
Synthetic fuel is got to be the future. And, the internal combustion engine, whilst it will always create some sort of negative emissions, they can be really minuscule. And in comparison to what goes into making the electric cars, I think we should be sticking to that. I think that's what we should be doing. Like net, it's a much smaller impact on the environment than what's going on with the electric cars.
At the beginning, you said if you had £100 million or dollars, I don't suppose it really makes much difference. You know what you would be buying. So
I know I'd spend it.
You know,
really quickly.
We have a question. What would you race? What would you have as your daily driver? And what would you buy just because?
So daily driver, I actually at the moment have an RS6, which I really like. But before that, I did have a GC4 Lusso, which I used for a year, and that was great as well. So one of those two for every day, just because they're really good. Obviously, the new 4x4 Ferrari is pretty cool. Like, I actually think it looks great.
Totally practical. Yep.
Yeah, perfect.
The non-SUV.
Yeah, well, it sort of, yeah. So that's that. Race.
Well, it'd be a Le Mans car, presumably.
Well, yeah. My answer, that's always like, what did I last win a race in?
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that I'm lucky that we've got so many cars at our fingertips that just give a different thrill and excitement in a different way that I never really quite know. I think it's more where I'm going, but certainly at this point in time, obviously like a modern, GT3 car, I'm getting the most excitement and enjoyment out of. But long term, I don't think you could go wrong with having just a GT40. I think you get in a GT40.
Just a GT40.
Well, no, because you're saying one race car, that's what I mean.
I always say, okay.
So I'm lucky I've got more than one race car. But if I had to have just one race car, I think,
just a GT40.
Just a GT40, yeah. And the car that Dubby and Sally used to own, which is the Piers Courage car that ran at Le Mans in that duck egg blue, I think that's, for me, that is the one race car I'd like to own forever. And then because in my GT40 that I own with Andrew Smith, that we've had for over 10 years, we did the Tour Auto in it 3 times, Le Mans Classic, multiple Goodwoods. I've had so much fun in that car. It would just be nice to have one that was like truly British originally and had that amazing history that blue car has. So that's my one race car, which I've never answered that before with that answer, but I think that is my answer.
That's today's answer.
That is today's answer.
Perfect.
And then what was the last one? One car?
No, that's it.
That's it.
You had
Race car,
3.
road car.
Race, road, keep. Race, road, race, road.
Yeah.
Whatever.
I'm
Great.
not sure we did keep.
No,
Well,
didn't.
keep was.
No, we didn't do it.
We didn't.
No, we didn't do it. Okay.
So I guess
Just because.
I think
just
because I really like car spaces and sort of having a really nice atmosphere to have a car, and it's got to be something that's an absolute centerpiece, and really tells a story. And I guess it's a bit cliche, but the F1 GTR that sits at McLaren that went there and went to Le Mans 95 and won overall first time out as basically a loosely modified road car. That's
pretty special.
really special.
The one on the boulevard.
The grey one, the Ueno Clinic car, which not many people know what the Clinic does, but it's quite funny. Anyway. I think that car, that's got to be the most valuable car in the world. It's got to be today, because it appeals to everyone.
Yeah.
GTO owners through to billionaires overnight. That's kind of in the middle.
Brilliant.
There we go.
Well, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
And
thanks for coming.
Well, thank you, and thank you.
I think
very
we could have
much.
gone on all day. Actually.
I know. Well, anyway,
But we
I'll
have
leave
to
you
stop,
it. We have to
unfortunately.
stop. One day we have to stop. But anyway, listen, thank you so much for having us.
Thanks so
And,
much.
Thanks for coming for the tour.
join us next time.